There's something almost unworldly about the relationship between John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Two sides of the same coin, one yin and one yang. The Lennon and McCartney songwriting team defined an era, shaped modern pop forever, and changed the way we hear music. But after the Beatles broke up, fans were left asking, what if they had just one more song together? One more moment of that magic. Yes, we've had Free as a Bird and Real Love and Now and Then, but we're talking about a real moment of all four of them in the studio. Well, unfortunately, we can't. Well, there was a moment that John wished he had Paul right next to him in the studio during the 1970s. A forgotten little spark in Lennon's solo years. A song he didn't give to Paul, but later admitted he wished he had. Just like the old days. Let's rewind. After the Beatles officially split in 1970, the media went wild. Headlines painted John and Paul as enemies and their relationship as irreparable. John's brutal song, How Do You Sleep, took direct aim at Paul. Paul responded with quiet digs and passive interviews. It all seemed bitter and very personal. All throughout the early 1970s, it felt like there was no going back. Media frenzy can always push the narrative in one direction. Of course, the reality was that it was more complicated than that, because under the surface, John and Paul were still tuned into each other's frequencies. What they had done together could never be truly forgotten by either of them. You see, they'd spent their entire youth writing together, shaping each other's musical instincts. By the time that they split, they could practically finish each other's songs, but working separately meant their weaknesses were more exposed. Neither of them was there to complement the other. John's raw honesty sometimes lacked polish and melody. Paul's polished melodies could come off as lightweight and cheesy without Lennon's cynicism. Which brings us to the song God Save Us. In 1971, John Lennon co-wrote a song called God Save Us with his partner Yoko Ono. It was part of a political campaign for freedom of speech and the release of imprisoned activists in the UK. But Lennon didn't sing it himself. Instead, he handed the vocals off to Bill Elliott, the frontman of a lesser-known band called the Elastic Oz Band. The record was released under John and Yoko's name. But years later, Lennon admitted something interesting about that song. He said, I thought that's a commercial sound. It would have been nice to have had Paul's voice singing God Save Us. So let that sink in for a minute. Amidst all the supposed bitterness, John Lennon, Mr. Plastic Ono Band himself, said he wanted Paul's voice on one of his solo tracks. Lennon, despite it only being 1 or 2 years since their split, arguably probably the bitterest point in their relationship, well, we still had John openly admitting that he needed Paul to basically bring out something in one of his songs. Needing him might be a little bit of a stretch, but you get what I mean. And it's rare to hear John speak that way about Paul after the breakup of the band. There's a kind of softness in that quote, an acknowledgement that Paul could do something that John maybe couldn't. We don't get many quotes like that from John. Not lyrically. Well, John was always confident about his words, and he's definitely a better lyricist, in my opinion. But vocally, melodically, there was something that McCartney could bring to the song that he couldn't. He went on to explain that while Bill Elliott imitated his demo and that he did overall like what he did with the song, the final version didn't quite capture what he imagined. He said, he sounds like himself because he doesn't really sound like me, but he doesn't sound like Paul either. So in John's mind, the song was stuck in between, not raw or rough enough to be his, but if Paul had sung it, maybe it would have clicked. Maybe it would have been a hit. It's a decent tune, and you can kind of imagine what it would have been like with Paul's vocals. Maybe we can get an AI approximation one day. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't John asking for a Beatles reunion, and on record, he never really said anything like this ever again. It was just Lennon just being matter of fact. He wished that Paul could have had a go on it, but well. It's just a song, and there'll be many others. But I think it's interesting because it does show that there's still the connection between them, and it's still there in that John was still thinking of him. John could still hear Paul's voice in his head when he was writing. Do we have a snapshot of Lennon fawning over nostalgia? I doubt it. It's still pretty cool though. What's even more fascinating is how their post-Beatles paths still mirrored each other. Lennon leaned into politics and primal screams. Paul leaned into pop and experimentation. but every now and then their styles overlapped like they were trying to fill in their own gaps. You can hear Lennon's melodic side on tracks like Love or Oh My Love, and you can hear Paul's bite on songs like Too Many People.
Too many people going underground.
So, what would God Save Us have sounded like with Paul singing? We'll never know, and maybe that's a good thing, because if it didn't live up to the Beatles' standard, fans might have seen it as proof that their magic was truly gone. In the end, God Saves Us remains a footnote in Lennon's solo career. A little known song I've never really seen mentioned much on the internet, but that one quote, "It would have been nice to have had Paul's voice on it," tells us a lot, and that's why I wanted to make this little video today. It tells us that despite all the noise, the media, the jabs, the headlines, all the pain that the breakup brought, John still valued what Paul McCartney could do as a musician. He still believed in that voice. He still saw Paul McCartney as a worthy adversary. Now that's pretty nice, innit? And maybe, just maybe, John missed him more than he liked to admit. Thanks very much for watching, guys, as always, and I'll see you in the next one.